Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to today's panel discussion on Asian Black Allyship. And before we start the program, just a few meeting logistics. If you have not done so, please update your name on the webinar with your real name and your company affiliation. And second, please feel free to use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen for audience interaction and then also general comments. And then you can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen for questions to the speakers. And know that this meeting is being recorded. And my name is Wen Nanan. I am a board member with Ascend Greater Philadelphia, and I am a senior portfolio manager at Lincoln Financial Group, which is Ascend's latest corporate sponsor as of this morning. And now, without further ado, I would like to pass on and introduce Elaine Chan, President of Ascend Greater Philadelphia and the Senior Vice President of Bank of America. So Elaine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Wen. Good afternoon to all of you who are attending from 23 states. Thank you for joining us. The response has just been tremendous, and it really reflects a strong desire by individuals in our communities to have this conversation on Asian Black allyship. Before we get into the program, I'd like to take a moment to introduce Ascend. We are the largest nonprofit Pan-Asian leadership organization for corporate directors, executives, business professionals, and students. We have a reach of 60,000 in the network, 20 professional chapters and 40 plus student chapters, and partnerships with 400 plus corporations throughout North America. Ascend serves to connect Pan-Asian professionals with training, networking, and mentoring opportunities to acquire the necessary leadership skills to meet you at every stage of your career life cycle. Our programs are supported by the invaluable partnerships with our corporate sponsors who are aligned with our mission of promoting diverse and inclusive practices towards achieving business growth. Today's event is sponsored by RSM, and I want to thank Sudhir Kandasetti, principal at RSM, for his support and partnership. Sudhir also serves on the Ascend Greater Philadelphia Advisory Board, and you will hear more from Sudhir, who will be moderating the panel today. We chose to tackle this topic on Asian Black allyship because Ascend maintains a long-standing objective of creating a safe space for courageous conversations for our members, partners, and sponsors to build allyship and stronger relationships in the workplace and communities. Allyship aligns to one of the core tenets of Ascend's 5-point action agenda, launched at the onset of COVID, where 100 plus corporations signed on in support of promoting inclusion, raising awareness, and denouncing bias. For the AAPI community, we saw a significant rise in anti-Asian hate. The high-profile death of George Floyd was a tipping point for action and kicked off an urgent conversation that was overdue and needed for the AAPI professional community to explore various avenues of allyship between AAPIs and our Black colleagues. What we found is a response that begs answers to the larger questions around the complex history and relationship between these two communities. While the scale of oppression and mistreatment suffered by Blacks is incomparable, Asians have faced their own set of discriminatory laws, and some of which you may have heard of, like the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, that was later repealed in 1943, which barred Chinese from entering the country as immigrants, owning land and being naturalized citizens, and the Japanese internment camps in World War II. I do want to be clear that AAPI and Black experiences in the US are unique and they cannot be equated. In an Ascend study with CDIOs, the finding reveals employees' lack of understanding of the AAPI and Black historical journey in America, particularly less understanding of AAPI history and experiences, a general lack of knowledge about the history and lived experiences of both groups, which can lead to the perpetuation of stereotypes and misperceptions is one of the impediments to stronger allyship between AAPIs and Blacks. It is the perpetuation of harmful stereotypes attributed to each group that continues to adversely affect how they relate to one another as colleagues and minorities. Indeed, understanding history would help dismantle the stereotypes of the model minority myth and other unfavorable stereotypes assigned to AAPIs. Above all, it would solidify the fact that Asians are Americans and contributed immensely to the founding of this nation. A better grasp of AAPI and Black histories, better appreciation and greater awareness of the rarely told histories of sacrifices, accomplishments of many beautiful lives that are inspiring regardless of the color of their skins, could help change stereotypical perceptions of both AAPIs and Blacks. The conversation is an effort to draw together the common values and the ideals of Asian and Black professionals as we continue to grapple with the issue of belonging in the corporate workplace. In this dynamic societal development, what we can do as individuals to support one another as we strive to foster genuine allyship will help promote awareness and strengthen workplace relations. As Ernest Gaines said, we all have much more in common than we have difference. So let me now introduce our esteemed panelists. Please join me in extending a warm welcome. And personally, I have the greatest pleasure to introduce you to the senior execs from leading corporations, Zhihao Hu, CFO of TD Bank, Stephen Pei, CIO of Prudential, and Delilah Wilson-Scott, EVP Chief Diversity Officer and President of NBC Universal Foundation for Comcast. And our moderator today is Sudhir Kandasetti, Principal at RSM. Sudhir, take it away.
Elaine, thanks for that eloquent introduction. I hope I can be a moderator that lives up to that great introduction you have. So for all of you, quick intro on me, Sudhir Kandasetti. As Elaine pointed out, I'm a principal with RSM. RSM is the largest provider of tax audit and consulting services to the middle market. My focus as a partner is in technology risk, and I'm also the office leader of the Philadelphia office. And then lastly, I currently serve on the board of directors for RSM. I've been involved with Ascend for almost a decade now, have learned a lot, built some great relationships, and I look forward to a rousing conversation today. Delilah, I'll turn it over to you for an intro.
Thank you, Sudhir. First, just let me say thank you to Ascend, both the national organization and of course the Greater Philadelphia team with Elaine's leadership right here. But just appreciate that there's been time and space that we'll have today for this conversation. But I serve as the Executive Vice President, Chief Diversity Officer here at Comcast Corporation. And this is a topic that's important to us, and we work with a lot of our employees, our ERG leaders, so look forward to discussing further with you today. And I will pass it to Stephen.
Hi, thank you. I also want to say thank you to Elaine and the team for inviting me to come talk with our esteemed panelists here. I came to learn a lot from them, as well as share some of my own experiences and thoughts. My name is Steve Pei. I think I know many of you. Currently, I serve as the head of digital for Prudential Financial. I've had many different roles in the past at different investment banks, but one experience I'm really proud of is serving as a former board member and executive director for Ascend. I'm very proud to have that opportunity in my past. And I'm really happy to be here and share some of my thoughts and also learn from our panels. So let me pass it off to Xiao.
Thanks, Steve. First of all, thanks to Sudhir and you and Delilah to be on the panel, and thanks Elaine as well. When I moved here in 2015, I think Elaine got me involved in Ascend Philadelphia, so thanks very much, Elaine. My name is Zhihao Hu. I'm the CFO for TD Bank, America's most convenient bank. I've been with TD for 12 years. One sentence to describe me is I'm a nerd for accounting and finance, but I have passion for diversity and inclusion. So very happy to be on the panel.
Okay, well, thank you all. And, you know, I don't know if I can say it better than how Elaine said it. No, the events of the past few years have really awakened in our communities the feeling of getting to understand the plight of really all the minority communities in the US, and how we can support each other, better understand the struggles that we've gone through, and what can we do to help business leaders in our communities. All of the panelists here are very successful and have overcome quite a bit to get there. Maybe if you can share your stories, either about yourselves or your family's journey and how it helped shape your successful careers. Delilah, could we start with you?
Sure, happy to do that. I think the reason this topic of Black and Asian allyship resonates with me personally is because my father's African American, my mother's Vietnamese. They met, my father served in the Air Force and my mom worked outside of the Air Force Base in Vietnam where they met and were married and moved back here to America. So in many ways, I see this issue from both sides, just their perspectives, but I also have my own perspective and sort of how I'm received and respected and treated in both communities, but also have that culture of both communities, which I've been incredibly blessed to have. But it also means I'm closer to the tension, just even in conversations we have in our own homes or as we were meeting many families. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, so it's a predominantly Black community, but we all know that all the Vietnamese people know how to find each other. So my mom had many friends and sisters. I had many aunties around the country, many women who came here just shortly after the war that she was able to befriend, but all sort of experiencing America in one way. And then, of course, just being in a Black neighborhood, there were many neighbors and friends and the church that reached out and made sure that she had a good sense of what it meant to be Black in America with 2 Black daughters, everything from, you know, how does she think about our hair or our food? And while she knew that, you know, we would be here and she wanted us to be American like other immigrants. And, you know, we went to church and she went to temple, you know, that's a choice she decided because she didn't want us to feel excluded. At the same time, she certainly made sure that we understood her heritage and her culture and accepted as our own. So I think when I think about this topic, I think about, again, my personal experience, but I've also been able to participate in serious and tough, complex conversations with Asian Americans as well as African Americans and the tensions that exist between us, all knowing that we share, I mean, I think Elaine said it out when she opened up, it's referenced in the Ascend research as well. We have similar histories, and while they cannot be equated, I think all of us understand what it means to have empathy for somebody else who's been discriminated against. And the only way a racist structure like this survives is by dividing communities like ours. And so just important for us to come together. And I think we all see the importance of that and the relevance of that, but it's so tempting to point to something as different.
Thank you, Delilah. Stephen, would you like to add on?
Wow, I was just listening to Delilah and I was just engrossed in her description. Sure, I'll tack on a little bit. You know, for me, it started probably several years ago. I know that there's been a lot of tension the last 2 years because of COVID and a lot of racial issues that got highlighted. But for me, a few years ago, a friend of mine who happened to be Asian talked to me and said, you know, I have a lot of friends that are Blacks in America. How many do you have? And I really thought about that question. This was several years ago. And I can honestly say back then it was 0. Like I did not have any close friends that were Black. And then I thought about in my professional life, my professional circle. We all have a professional circle of go-to people that we work with, former colleagues, current colleagues. And then I thought about how many of them are really within my kind of close circle. And again, the answer was zero. So I really wanted to come out and really bring that up, because that really brought two different perspectives to me. One was how was I raised, and how my cultural thoughts were influenced by my parents and my grandparents and my family. I was an immigrant. I was 5 years old when I came to the United States with my sister, my parents. Obviously, I had no choice from South Korea to have a better living here. But grew up in a predominantly white area with a white school, and I really didn't have that cultural interaction with other races. And then I thought about professionally, like, why do I not have close, uh, circle of network of friends and professionals I work with that are Black? And it wasn't, again, was it because of the way I grew up and some of the biases that maybe was inherent in my family? Or was it also for the institutions and the organizations I worked with that we didn't have a lot of representation from people of color? So those are a couple of things that really, invoked my thinking and how I got more and more involved in the various ERGs and BRGs of companies that I took leadership roles in. But what that experience has really led me to think about is how little understanding I have actually of the history for Blacks and their plight in America. I probably have also less understanding of even the AAPI history in America. And as Elaine mentioned, those two educational experiences are really important for us to really acknowledge and understand, I think, as part of starting to understand each other, and how the harmful stereotypes that we've created, whether it's in our family, our parents, sometimes we may be even instilling into our own children, really has to be thought about, because it will perpetuate. So I really hope that this conversation, provokes some real thought into each one of us thinking about our own circles and how we grew up and who do we have in our circles that are close to us. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to attend this panel and learn from all the great panelists as well.
Thank you, Stephen. Ji Hao, would you like to talk about your story?
Sure. Yeah. Like Steve, I immigrated from China back in 1994 when I was about 19 years old. I would say my story is a little bit on the positive side, and I was fortunate to have institutions that I'm part of that always has been very supportive. So my goal is to take those kindness and benefits I received, to pay it back and pay it forward to other pillars of the minority group, and trying to help the entire group, like Delilah said, collectively grow and advance our agenda. So when I started school at a very small town called Bemidji, Minnesota, most people probably don't know. It's a 10,000 people town, and coming from Shanghai of 15 million people to 10,000 people town, and it's mainly white, I was very uneasy. But the school had made it uber easy. We have an international student organization, and the school actually funded us to do an annual banquet, to do ethnic foods and actually do ethnic performance for the locals, who are mostly white students, teachers, and local families. And it's like a big feast every year. We get to exchange ideas, exchange our cultures with mostly white communities, and get them to understand kind of where we're coming from, and we understand where their life is. So that's like a huge way for me to integrate into the U.S. life. And then I went to Deloitte, starting as my career as an auditor, and I was on an internship on a job. And so, as some of you know, as auditors, you work on the weekends during busy season. And so Saturday come around, and the CFO said, "Hey, tomorrow you guys gonna be working with my staff, and would you guys like to bring some donuts?" Oh, sure, like, yeah. So I'm the low man on the totem pole. I'm the intern, so I'm gonna go get the donuts. And so I jotted down everyone's request, and the one from the CFO was extremely complicated. And maybe my English was not as good at the time or whatnot, so I essentially jotted down the wrong order for him. So the next day comes, Saturday, I brought donuts in the office. Everyone's very appreciative. I got called into the CFO's office, and CFO said, "You got my donut round." And then he said, "You yellow people, you can't even get an order of donut correctly." And I was horrified, because I was an intern. I'm trying to get a permanent job. And there we go. The CFO said I didn't do a good job, can't even get donuts correctly. So I came back, and my senior found out, and she told me, she said, "Don't worry about this. Let me clear it out for you." She called the partner in charge, and the partner called the CFO and got me into the CFO's office again. The partner said to the CFO, "She housed my staff, And he is just as smart as everyone else on the engagement team, just as smart as you are. Whatever you just said to him is actually absolutely not acceptable. I'll report this to the audit committee and to the board when we actually finish the financial statement audit. And he actually did. The CFO did eventually get fired, not just because of that, but this is one of the factors. So when you went to an institution that supports you full-heartedly, even when you are a foreigner, I was the only minority kid in the entire audit practice at the time, one of 132 people. To get that support from institutions is just unbelievable. And the last one is when I got to TD, I just saw TD is on the forefront of progressive leadership when it comes to D&I stuff as well. We were talking prior to the start, my predecessor, Kelvin Tran, TD sponsored Kelvin to build Ascend Canada from scratch back in 2011. Now Ascend is one of the leading, most leading Asian professional organizations in the land. So all of those just make me feel very lucky that I got all those allyship, got all those support, and I like to pay it back with my Asian colleagues as well as with my Black colleagues as well.
Thanks, Shihao. Thanks for sharing such a personal story. And I think it shows an element of, these situations that happen strengthen who we are. And it's an attribute we bring to the business community, right? Is this resilience and strength and ability to overcome obstacles. I think that really helps us in our careers. But thank you for sharing that. I know it's not easy to share those kind of stories, so I appreciate that. So one of the things that Elaine touched on is the stereotypes we often face in our community. And in the Asian community, the model minority myth is very popular, and it hurts us, right? Whereas so many of us, Asia is a huge continent, right? And lumping us all together is incorrect. People have migrated here under different circumstances, different socioeconomic circumstances, different family circumstances, different educational levels. And lumping all Asians together really hurts some of the underprivileged Asians living in underprivileged communities. Likewise, the Black community suffers the same thing, right? The stereotype is the Black person who grew up in the inner city, but there's Black people who grew up in rural communities. There are Black people who have come from Africa or the islands. There's mixed race people. So we can't lump all of us together, right? And it starts with understanding everyone's needs. I'm curious what your organizations are doing to help the community as a whole learn more about the respective minority groups in your company and the differences in their communities and the struggles they've gone through. Stephen, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, I mean, let me first comment that, the model minority myth is definitely real and out there. I think it also brings up two concepts that I want to make sure we break. And at my company, we definitely believe in this, making sure that conformity is not a mandate to succeed. Because I think the model minority myth, in one way, makes us all think about not only are we lumped together, but we then point to the Asian population and saying, they've conformed and they're succeeding. And conformity is not a way to succeed. We need to have honest conversations about how our differences are really our strengths. I think the other thing that the model minority myth does is places us at odds. It really makes us think about the pie is limited. We talk about the pie a lot, that it's a fixed pie and one group has to win. If one group wins, the other group loses. And I know we need to think about that differently. The pie is limitless. We can grow this pie for all groups. So those are the two things I really wanted to share about the model minority myth. I think in my organization, I have tremendous respect for Prudential since I joined in how they've really approached DE&I. We have a terrific leader here. I think Delilah knows her very well. But I've been very impressed with our programs and our initiatives. It really starts from the top of the organization. and really saying that there's equal opportunity for all, and really looking at all of our practices for hiring, promoting, performance management, and making sure that we're developing each of our employee fairly and justly. Let me give you an example of that, just to make it concrete. Here at Prudential, one of the concepts is about promotions, right? So when there is an opportunity, a new role that is a level or a couple of levels higher than you, all levels, they're actually posted so that each individual has line of sight on what those new roles are, and you could actually apply to those positions. This actually breaks some of the trends that I've used to in previous organizations where people used to get promoted in their current role, right? Current seat. At the end of the year, there was a process by which you looked at, well, did they do well this year? Let's promote them. This opportunity now at Prudential, where all roles and opportunities of different levels are posted, allows equal opportunity for everyone to look at those opportunities and say, am I qualified? Let me actually interview and post for those roles. So I thought, that's a beautiful concept and something that I really wanted to call out that Prudential does really well. We also, from the top of the house, set up goals with clear accountability. We want to make sure that we have representation across all levels, senior, mid, junior. We talk a lot about the model minority myth and the myth of Asian leadership, where Asians are thought of as being highly successful technicians that come into the organization at high numbers. But promotion is a different story. We don't see that kind of representation similar to other people of color. So that's another important thing that our organization does. And then we talk about community and working with the community. We have committed that we'll show greater transparency on our diversity data. I think a lot of organizations have also vouched to do this, but we have vouched that all levels of diversity data we will actually showcase so that everyone can see in our community what kind of impact we're having. So those are a few things I just wanted to share in terms of some of the things that Prudential is doing at our organization.
Thank you, Stephen. Jihao, would you like to share what TD is doing?
Yeah, sure. Like I mentioned earlier, TD definitely is trying to be leading the kind of the ESG D&I conversation. From the top of the house, if I look at the leadership at our CEO table, including himself, there's 14 leaders at that table, and 5 are actually visible minorities. So that's 36%, and then 4 women, about 30%. So that looks pretty good on one end. But then you dissect a little bit, you see that there's actually more to do. First of all, conspicuously, there is actually no African-American on the leadership team at all. So we know there's a lot of talented African-American professionals in the organization. I think we need to give them a chance to ascend to the top level as well. And second, that statistics actually doesn't replicate at every level at the senior management. So if you look at one level down, the stats are not as good as at the top level. So definitely there's a lot more to do. And then, of course, during the pandemic, with the heightened racial tension, both on anti-Asian and also the George Floyd tragic event, TD did segregate out Black experience from the visible minority pillar in our program for D&I. So one is we can set up separate mentorship and sponsorship programs for our very talented Black professionals. And second, we're expanding the recruitment channel via working with any local or national Black professional organizations, so we can get more Black talents into TD. And third, recently I'm working on a project essentially trying to take bias out of interviews for Blacks and also for visible minority candidates using AI. There is a Canadian-based company called Knockery. So they will use AI to basically analyzing your interview, and then we'll take those informations, regardless of whether you're white, Black, Asian, and can do a more unbiased analysis of your capability, how directly you're answering the questions. It's actually fun. I just got a link a few minutes ago to do my mock interview. So I hope that I will fare pretty well. Otherwise, my boss probably will fire me. And then the last piece we're trying to do as this year's theme is to build more intersectionality between the Black employee experience pillar and any other diversity pillar that we have at TD. And on the community side, from a business perspective, we're looking to put investment into Black-owned businesses, especially Black-owned banks in our footprint. And then, we also have, through TD Foundation, donate into a lot of causes related to the Black communities. One of them I was involved in a couple of years ago was related to a USTA, a non-for-profit organizations in the inner city in Philly, teaching the kids after school how to play tennis as a hobby. So they don't have to run around and do something that's untoward, but they can actually learn something that's very, very good for their health, but also good for their building up their future career as well. So all those, I think TD is doing, more and more. And again, like I said, more to do, more to come for TD's involvement with our own people and also with the community.
Thank you, Zihao. I think you're lucky they didn't teach me to play tennis. That would have been a lost cause.
I was a lost cause on tennis, so I didn't participate in actual playing.
Delilah, how about Comcast?
Sure, I'll touch on a couple of examples. I mean, lots of similarities, with what we've already heard on Prudential and TD. But the other piece is, of course, Comcast is the parent corporation to NBC Universal, as well as Sky. And through our media is one of the ways that we look to educate, not just our own employees, but the public. We have a news vertical that we call Asia America that looks to showcase stories about Asian Americans in a way that may not necessarily exist at scale in mass media. We also leverage a lot of the reporters to do research and present to our own employees about what we're seeing, what we're hearing, and what types of narrative change is necessary. I mean, Sudhir, you mentioned it at the top, no community is monolithic, period. But there can be a tendency for all of us just to rely on what we know, no matter how uninformed that is. All of our organizations have employee resource groups, and one of the ways that we intentionally look to bring them together is we have this concept of you don't have to be to belong. So regardless of your race or heritage, you can join our various ERGs, and we use it as a point of education, and we make sure events are open to everyone and we promote them broadly so people can go deep into current events, what has happened historically, some of the myths that we talked about, some of the stereotypes, because it's helpful for people to understand why something might be offensive. Sometimes people truly are ignorant. Some people truly are racist as well. But I think having more education and understanding and empathy for one another is huge. The other thing we'll do is incentivize joint events so that two ERGs can come together to present a topic. So shortly after George Floyd, we did several events with our Black, our African-American ERG, our Asian ERG, as well as our LGBTQ ERG to talk about a number of these issues across different communities, and truly kind of highlighting this notion of intersectionality so that people don't think about or don't default to a monolithic view. The other thing we know is, and I think Steve mentioned this, neither the Black community or the Asian community is adequately represented in senior ranks in most of corporate America. We definitely see highlights in different places, but we also have to really dig deep into that data to understand what the barriers are. And they can be different for different populations, and we have to target solutions based on that. But I think just the fact that we know we both need to work together to advance, to support, one another, just like Shihao mentioned, that the person who pulled aside the partner, right? We can do that for each other as well. When we see something that happens in a room that should certainly be elevated, making sure that people are clear that we're very intentional about our allyship. Most people are willing to be allies, but they don't often know the best ways to be an ally. So I think having sessions and follow-up sessions with managers, people leaders, and employees about how to showcase that is important. But it does require everybody to be a bit uncomfortable. And sometimes everybody everyone doesn't love to jump into that space, right? But it is the way we grow. It's the way we learn. It's the way we have a lot more respect for one another if we take the time to educate and understand our respective histories and what it is we can do together to go forward. And also women within our populations, we certainly haven't, sort of reached the heights of our potential for either community, but women do far worse than men in most of our communities as well, whether that's senior executive representation, advancement, promotion, et cetera. And so again, sort of within our communities, there intersectionality where we have opportunities to help, but I think pointing it out and having those discussions, being very intentional about education are just a few of the ways that we try to make it you know, an inclusive place for everyone, but also a place where people can learn a little bit more about where everybody's coming from.
Great, thank you, Delilah. I'm going to change it up a little bit, and I know we had some questions we would fill in, but I did get some questions in through the Q&A function. For those of you on the call, there is a Q&A button on the bottom of the screen. Feel free to click on it and type in a question. And Jiha, maybe I'll set it, give you this one first because it really came out of your story. Sure. The attendee really enjoyed your story, thought it was a great story, and it highlighted the importance of having support from leadership. Is there anything you would share or you think that leaders can do to be there for Pan-Asian and Black team members?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, the tone is always at the top. I think for a leader to speak out when there are events that clearly is, you know, racism events against the Black communities, against the Asian American communities. I think that for the CEOs, for the CFOs to stand out publicly and stake the ground to say those are absolutely not acceptable is very important, because people look to those. Maybe just one sentence or two, maybe just a short statement issued right away, but that will carry a lot of weight in the heart and minds of the folks in the communities. I think that's important. And then also be proactive in participating, in joining in different events and supporting the cause of you know, the African American, and supporting the Asian American community is also important. Don't just do lip service and just talk but not showing the actions. So both tone at the top and action, I think, is the two most important thing to me.
Yeah, Sid here, if I can just jump in also, I love that participation, because I always found that, you know, taking action and participating is one of the ways to continuously listen and learn. And I do think for senior leaders, for all of us in our leadership, we need to always listen and learn. I mean, we need to continually challenge what we know today, what we accept as normal, and make sure that our previous held notions about race and identity and allyship are continually challenged and, you know, obviously made better. So I do think that, you know, participating, reading, learning, taking courses are all part of what I would ask our senior leaderships to continuously do.
Well, here's a hard one. So Delilah, I'm going to give it to you.
Lucky me.
Yes.
And this is a difficult one. A person asks, how can I manage up if I don't feel my business is doing enough to support visible minorities? I think we're lucky that all of us work for organizations that have strong diversity functions and initiatives, but what if you don't? And if they're not doing enough, well, what can one do?
Sure. And it's a good question. And while we are fortunate to work for companies that highlight and champion diversity, equity, and inclusion, I'm sure all of us have faced situations and have met with a situation where we wanted to challenge the status quo. Even now, we're all hearing about what will wane. You know, there's been all these corporate commitments. There's been much more of a highlight on goal setting, transparency, and reporting. But what will happen a few years from now, where there still be this intensity in the space? So number one, I think it's important when you're raising an issue to make sure that you're stating the issue objectively and you're being clear about what was offensive to you. You know, great leaders don't know it all, period. You know, and just to just reinforce what Stephen just said, it's great leaders have voracious appetite for learning. They're quick to admit when they're wrong, and they're very open about a failure and hoping to create the space where everybody can learn from it. So, you know, number one, I think you have to create the conditions as safely as possible as you can to sort of raise a specific event that happened or commentary that was made, and then very specifically cover why it was offensive. And, you know, I also think it's important when you can to say, here's a couple of ways we can think about to move us forward from there. So, you know, I want to have my complaint, to be clear, on record, but I also think we can grow from this. And here are a couple of reasons, ways I thought about it, or here are a couple of ideas I have to get us started on that journey. And if you are so inclined, also to help support that work. A lot of times when there's a DEI initiative, the first person, right, that gets tasked is the person who's a minority in the room. It's not for us to bear completely, but it often is one of us that raises these issues in a very connected and personal way that can create change in an organization. So I would say, don't be afraid about raising that issue, but be very thoughtful about how you raise it, who you raise it with, and what you want to see as the outcome. Because I think getting to that solution in a way that supports the business, the culture, is important, especially when you know, like Xiao said, so many companies might state the right values, but they might not be living with them. And that feels almost worse than a company that is not saying anything at all. You know, when you see an incident that clearly challenges the values that your company espouses, you know, this is places of respect, integrity, we support DEI, but here's something that clearly didn't meet that standard. That's important to point out. Leaders want to know that. And the more and more people that raise that as an issue is key. What we all know is employees have so much more of a greater voice today than they did 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Whether you're looking at the Edelman Trust Barometer, any sorts of surveys, employee walkouts, employees have a lot of power that they didn't always have in the work environment. So use your voice, you know, talk to people you know well, but also be ready to talk to someone who may very well disagree with what you're bringing forward, but be sure to find that space to raise that issue.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, I think that was great and spot on. I think employees also just have a plethora now of resources, you know, both internally and externally of their organization. So if they're not finding the right set of resources internally, there are organizations that are nonprofits like the ones that's hosting today, as well as other equivalent ones for Blacks and other minorities that they can tap into. I mean, there's so much learning you can do to approach the situation and guidance you can receive. And like was mentioned, you know, reach out to, you know, your network, reach out to your professionals that you work with to get some advice, because the worst thing you can do is stay silent. That will gnaw at you forever. And then it'll probably impact other people as well in the future. So, you know, I think taking action, but taking the right action by going to, you know, creating the right message, approaching it correctly, and learning and using the resources that are available, both internally and externally, would be important.
Yeah, the other thing, sorry,
Okay.
go ahead, Steve. I cut you
No, I
off.
just want to commend the person for asking the question, because that is a tough question. And, you know, just by asking it here, I think it's a first step.
The other thing, just to add on to both Delilah and Steve said, is you know, as employees, if you see it's not quite catching on at the organization at the top level, I think you guys can unite in trying to push for the issue as well. The one good example I always want to get is, you know, when I got to TD in Toronto, so the first year I was there, I was invited to this Lunar New Year banquet, and it was a fantastic one. It's like 600 some people, and everyone seems very happy. We have senior leaders there. I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. Like TD does that for their employees. But you know what? When it started, it was not a company-sponsored event. It was started with 9 people, starting with their first table of celebration. Then they start to invite other people to join in, and some of them are, you know, Asian Canadians, and some of them are not. They're allies. Gradually, they build into momentum. The last one, which is 2019, before we went into COVID-19, was 1,500 people at the banquet. And even the past 2 years, we did it virtually. We have more than 1,000 people online to celebrate Lunar New Year together. So it does take some of the hearts and minds and unite together to fight for our causes as well.
I think we have time for one more quick question. And I did want to throw this one out there. We have quite a few in the queue, but because I do feel this is the future of America. For those of us who are 2 or more races, a common theme is we don't really have a place where we fully belong or at home? Are you aware of any companies or organizations emphasizing celebrating two or more and making a home? Anyone? I'll open it to anyone if they want to take this.
I mean, I'll address it, from my perspective. There are a lot more companies and even several governmental agencies that are tracking people who fall into multicultural category or 2+ races. But as you can imagine, there is a huge number of people that fall into that bucket. And I think there's a question that still exists about how to do that well, because you'll also see reports, and whether it's census, et cetera, the more people that show up in that multicultural 2+ races category with no additional detail, it takes away from the other cultures that are being represented. So many people do often feel forced to choose one, but many people often identify more with one as well. That said, I think there is a lot more awareness that, just this broader topic of intersectionality, that there is no finite list of classifications that everybody feels comfortable choosing one. So how do we grow the table so we can have that type of conversation? But I think it's partially a data collection issue, when so much other data that exists right now doesn't necessarily recognize that segment. And then two, what does it mean to be multicultural? And how do you really honor that experience? Because my experience being Black and Asian is completely different from someone who may be Native American and Asian, et cetera. And so I think there's work to be done, but it definitely is recognized. And I think the first thing you'll start to see is more data, just capturing how many people actually fall into that bucket. We know the number is significantly larger than anything we've been able to collect to date.
Yeah, I was going to follow up and say, like, this is an issue that's being recognized more and more. And we actually had what we call pulse survey every year. And last year, the score for what we call visible minority pillar didn't do quite as well as I thought it would be. And so we dive into a little bit of detail in terms of which group under that pillar is not doing so well. It turned out to be it's folks with two or more kind of belongings to different racial group. So their comments is pretty direct. Is I don't know where my belonging truly is, and there's no one addressing that head on. So as part of leading the group, leading this pillar at TD, we're actually taking some additional, time to look through this and to see what we can do to help those folks to find more belongings. Even like changing the name of the group, instead of VISMing, it will change to something else. One of the suggestions is multicultural inclusion exchange. So that could give you a little bit sense of belongings through just the name and rebranding as well. So definitely more to do on that, but I think it's becoming more and more obvious that this is an issue we have to deal with head on.
Let's squeeze one more question in there. Elaine will yell at me later. But how would you suggest young Asian and Black junior executives pursue mentors and sponsors at their respective companies or externally? Stephen, you want to pick that one up?
Yeah, I could start first. I mean, I think one of the biggest things I've come across for young professionals, young executives that want to mentor is they're afraid to ask because they feel like the executives are too senior. They're not going to have the time. Many people will be asking them for the same type of mentorship or sponsorship, which are two different things. But what I found is executives want to help. They want to be asked. They want to make the time. This is a really important concept for leaders. And I think, you're not asking the executive to have some grand, some kind of grand plan, a grand action for you, right? A tremendous amount of time. You're asking for small, bite-sized opportunities to interact with them and learn with them. So I think a lot of executives, believe it or not, want to help and they want to listen and they want to engage. So we have to stop ourselves and creating our own barrier of not wanting to ask because we're making excuses that we don't think they want to help. So I think that that's the first step. And I think in many organizations like the ones we represent have mentoring programs that are either run by BRGs, ERGs, or through HR, which everyone should be taking advantage of if that's an avenue you want to take. And lastly, really think about, I would say, people don't think about mentorship outside the organization. I think it's really important that you have mentors internal, but don't forget about the mentors you can reach out to external. Sometimes they have wonderful perspectives being outside the organization. Maybe they were a former, manager that left, but they have wonderful perspectives from the diversity of different companies that they've worked with. So think about the plethora of mentors potential outside the organization as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also I think, we should think through mentors that we admire, but they don't always have to look like us, share our culture. I think it's good to have great diversity. So internal, external, different race, heritage, different part of the organization. I also think just being specific, with the first asking for 15 minutes, having some casual conversation, but maybe something very specific that you want that mentor to help you with, because it's true. No one's going to give you a grand plan as to what's the next step to take in your career, but you want somebody who can provide you guidance that's going to be additive to what you can bring yourself. So I do think diversity in mentors is key, but it's hard to say no to a 15-minute ask, right? A 15-minute coffee. And so starting there, and likely it will go longer, but it's just a great way to get your foot in the door.
Yeah, I was going to use the word shameless. Just go shamelessly asking for mentorship. Most people actually will agree to a 30 minutes coffee or virtual chat with you. And the second is, when you find mentor, don't always look at their title. Talk to a few people before you decide who your mentor you want to be. Title doesn't mean anything. You interview them, find their experience, what's the most useful to you, and you guys form a mentorship relationship. That's very important as well.
Well, thank you, Ed. And I always find that you should ask and not be afraid to ask, because most people are very thankful to be considered as a mentor, to be your mentor, right? They're flattered, and you'd be surprised how many people, their response is, "Oh, I didn't think anyone would ever ask me to be a mentor," and they're very eager to share their insight and advice. Lastly, I'll just make a plug. ASCEND, NABA, these are great organizations to get involved with, meet senior leaders who can serve as your mentors. So, Elaine, I think I will send it back to you for the last 5 minutes.
Perfect. Well, what an awesome discussion. I heard a few things I wanted to kind of just repeat so that it sinks in for me. I love the word intentional allyship. That is, I think it's incumbent on all of us to make the workplace a place where people feel belong. It is a one-on-one humanistic exchange, but what it boils down to is wanting to get to know your colleague, your friend at work, and having them share those histories with you. I think if you hear those histories, then it really doesn't matter. They're just that their experiences resonate, and that sort of takes away any other barriers. The other thing I took away was, don't forget that, this place and time that we're having this conversation, let's all collectively try to keep this intensity going. It is difficult. I think the stars are aligned right now for us to have this conversation, but let's all, work at keeping this intensity going. We need your voice. So with that, I want to draw your attention to an event that's coming up on June 15th, and love to have you join us. This event, as you can see here, is being led by our national team. Again, to continue this important conversation, it really comes off a position paper that ASCEND Foundation, I should say, published, and hopefully it will be out very soon for public consumption. And really, it's going to take this conversation to the next level. So I hope you can join us on June 15th. I want to thank all our panelists today, our moderator Sudhir, for this fantastic, insightful conversation, truly inspiring. So thank you, and thank you all for attending. Please follow us. Here are some of our handles. Please join us and follow us for our next event. So with that, Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We'll give you a few minutes back. Have a great evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.